Welcome to Free Thought Matters. I'm Dan Barker. This week, Annie Laurie and I are turning the show over to FFRF attorneys Elizabeth Cavell and Andrew Seidel to interview Hemant Mehta, the hugely popular writer, YouTuber, and podcaster who runs the Friendly Atheist website. Hemant edited the book Queer Disbelief. He wrote the book The Young Atheist Survival Guide. Hemant's first book was I Sold My Soul on eBay, and Andrew and Liz asked Hemant about that devilish transaction.
It's been a while now. It's maybe around 2006 or so, and I was an atheist and I was working with several different atheist organizations, but one of the things I realized is that I'm really surrounded by a lot of people who left a Christian church. I didn't have that experience. I came from a smaller religion that most people hadn't heard of, Jainism. And, I knew about Christianity enough because I have friends who were Christians, but I never went there myself. And so, I'm getting more interested in this sort of activist world, but I don't have the same background as everyone else. So around the time eBay was a big deal, people were putting stuff on there all the time, and I put this silly thing at the time that said, you can bid on where I go to church. Eventually, I'll donate the money to charity. It's not about that, but that would be a fun way because I want to go. I'm curious just to see it firsthand, if nothing else. But I also don't want to go if no one's going to answer my questions, if no one's going to pay any attention to it.
Well, you got to have some incentive to
There's got to be some incentive. If nothing else, I'll write it on a website or I'll make a diary somewhere just so someone can see what I'm doing, not for any other reason than I know I'm going to have questions when I go. And it doesn't matter if it's a church or a mosque or a synagogue. I'm going to have questions, but I want people to talk to me about it. And so I put this thing up on eBay. It was only later that they said he's selling his soul on there. That was not part of the issue. In fact, I learned later if I wanted to sell my soul on eBay, I can't do it because eBay calls it a body part.
You're kidding.
So you cannot sell your soul on eBay.
Oh yeah, I'm surprised you don't actually have to have a tangible product,
It's a good argument to raise with them. So anyway, this pastor won the auction for $500.
Wow.
I owed him 50 weeks of church. And he said, the cool thing about this pastor, Jim Henderson, was that he said, I grew up in a church culture. I was a pastor. I know, I love reaching out to atheists. I'm not hiding that at all. But I also know if you go to church for 50 weeks, you are not going to want anything to do with church. So, and he was very much interested in having an atheist be critical of churches. Mm-hmm. But he also knew that I was a newbie to this whole thing. So he made me a deal. He said, I live in Chicago. He said, I know the Chicago landscape. Let me pick some churches for you. And you just go to those handful of churches. You write about it for my ministry, where we'll have a conversation going like I wanted. And he's like, and we'll call it a deal. I'm like, I'm in. That sounds great. So he picked out for me, go to this evangelical mega church. Mm-hmm. Go to a black church on the south side of Chicago. Go to a guy's living room because he's just starting a church. He took me to or at least he sent me to a variety of places. And in my head, the idea I had about what church was like, it was very limited. And he was really trying to expand that idea of what a Christian church looked like. So I went to all these places, and some of them did fit my stereotype. Yeah. They were really boring. They were like The Simpsons, that, you expect the droning, the monotone sermon, things like that. Yeah, there were some of that. I learned why those megachurches are so influential, because the show they put on was incredible.
It's an emotional service.
Yes, and the pastors were so good at delivering a message, even if the religious aspect of it didn't hit me the same way it hit other people. It was like, I can tell why people come here every week. And even some of the other churches I went to that were not nearly as big, they still were doing this amazing charity work. They were doing a lot of community service type of things where I'm sitting there thinking, it's really hard for me to say religion is bad just as a blanket statement when I'm seeing what some of these people do. And I'm not saying I was totally naive to all of this, but a lot of this was new to me. And the amazing thing is, as I wrote about these experiences on his ministry's website, the feedback people were giving were very similar to the thoughts I was having. And like, even when I said I didn't like what they did at this church, here's why I didn't like this sermon. I didn't like what this pastor said here. You had a lot of Christians chiming in saying, I don't like that either. I'm still a believer, but I don't like that aspect of church either. You had atheists saying, I feel the same way about some of these things. That's why I left church. And it was, how hard is it to find a comment thread that is productive and civil when people disagree about something so serious?
Yeah.
So it was kind of incredible that we were having this conversation at all. And the neat thing is, after that, I had an opportunity to write a book about this experience, and the publisher was like, well, we want to send you to more churches. So I ended up going to like 24 more places that ran the gamut, again, of Christian churches, but a gamut of Christian experiences. So I went to Joel Osteen's church in Texas, and at the time, Ted Haggard's church in Colorado,
wow.
and a lot of smaller churches that I think most people have not heard of. And again, good experience. It was a great learning experience because none of them changed my mind about God, but they did change, my experience when it came to Christianity. And I think even now, I try to be really careful when I'm talking about something a religious leader is doing that I don't like, or someone's doing something illegal that FFRF is working on. I try to make really clear what type of Christians we're talking about, what denomination or what their beliefs are that separate them. Because, we all know separation of church and state. There are a lot of religious people who support that too, and it's unfair to lump them in with some of the criticism. So that experience definitely helped me learn kind of firsthand. This is what's out there, and I only heard about this little sliver of it in the past.
But
Broaden, broaden your perspective.
It did. Did it broaden the perspective?
Or and kind of immersed you in the people of it, get closer to what Christianity looks like, from the people who are in its perspective.
Yeah, and they not only knew what it was like firsthand. It's different when you hear about these things from someone else instead of experiencing it firsthand. It's also different when you hear about these experiences from someone who's no longer a Christian, because you always wonder how much of this is baggage you're bringing into it, and how much is genuinely, are you going to give them praise when they deserve it? And now I could see it firsthand, and I think it helped me be a more effective critic when I don't like something I'm looking at. So I've said this to a lot of atheists too, which, if you haven't been to these places, especially some of the more influential mega churches or churches in your community, you should go to a service. Just see what they're doing. Don't ruin their day. Don't go there with a protest sign, but go watch it. Go listen to it, because you need to hear it firsthand instead of even a clip that might be taken out of context or just what you read about in the news. Go experience it, because that is a good thing for everyone to do. And by the way, I would encourage that for people to do with mosques and synagogues, and I would encourage religious people to do that too.
That was actually one of the ways that I became an out atheist, was experiencing. My parents were, go to the Jewish temple with your friends, go to church with your other friends. They were not religious, but that helped me leave religion.
Sure, when you see that, all these people, in theory anyway, are trying to make the world a better place. Some of them are doing really important things to facilitate that, but these are not unique to their faith. We've seen people do it for reasons other than God, and there's no reason it has to be tied to religion. It's like, this isn't like as special as I thought it was. Or this thing is not tied to believing in God. I can have all the good stuff that I like without this aspect that I don't believe in. And that's kind of an important thing to realize for yourself too, especially if you're new to even thinking about religion in a critical way.
Right.
So you visited like 50-some churches.
Way too many.
You're still an atheist. You sold your soul. You're still an atheist.
Yeah.
And you write for The Friendly Atheist. And I mean, this is a hugely popular website. I visit it several times a day. You have a podcast, 250 episodes, I think?
Something like that, yeah.
A YouTube show, The Atheist Voice, like 200,000 subscribers. So why all these different platforms?
So what was interesting is, when I was writing for this ministry, the minister's blog, where we were having these conversations, that was a neat thing, and it was a new thing for me at the time, but I really enjoyed that back and forth, and that what was civil dialogue at the time, right? And so I wanted to keep that going somehow, even when I was done visiting churches. So I started the Friendly Atheist blog as kind of a way to just keep talking about these things and having these conversations. I've been doing it for more than a decade now, and it's kind of morphed into less about me and my personal journey and more about let's talk about what's happening in the news as it relates to atheists. So that's one thing, but one of the interesting things is I've spoken at colleges. I speak at several places, and the students there aren't necessarily reading blogs. They're not necessarily reading books that were influential as I was, becoming an atheist, like all the new atheism books. They've heard of them, but it didn't influence their minds in the same way. So the question is, well, how is your thinking shaped if it's not by the stuff that shaped people like us?
Right.
And the answer was, I watch these people on YouTube at the time. So it's like, well, okay, if I want to change how your mind, if I want to influence your mind, if I want to change your mind about these issues that I'm passionate about, let me go there. And the interesting thing about that is it was not something I calculated and tried. It was just something I happened to try with a friend, and we realized people were watching it, which that doesn't always happen. You can put a lot of stuff out there. It doesn't mean anyone's going to watch. But the thing that surprised me is it seemed like, if I were in their position and I wasn't sure what I thought about these things, I might go to Google and type in, what happens if you don't think the book of Genesis is literally true? And I would go see what websites pop up.
Sure.
That's even a little after my time, because I think I would just log on to AOL after my parents were asleep and we had one phone line free
tone, yeah.
and see what was available. But like a little after me, that's what I think a lot of people were doing. Let's type this stuff in. Let's see what websites come up. And now they were doing that on the YouTube search bar.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, who's answering those questions for them?
Right.
And I didn't like a lot of the people who were answering the questions for them. So we were trying to offer answers to how do you get morality without religion? What do you do if you don't believe in God? And just trying to provide an honest response to some of these questions. And the amazing thing is people were finding us instead of us trying to do anything to find an audience. And so since then we kept up the YouTube channel, which is just trying to talk about these issues that I write about all the time on the website, but maybe let's just talk about it in a way that maybe a different format that people might appreciate. And the amazing thing is now if I go to speak to a younger audience anyway, they only know the YouTube channel. They don't read my site at all. And I'm like, I spend 90% of my time here, but all right. And the podcast was the same thing, which is we started doing interviews with people who were really interesting and they were religious, they were atheists, but they always had something interesting to say. And now it's a lot of just discussion about the news in a way that I can't do when it's only one-sided, which is YouTube, or an opinion on random things, which is the blog. Now I can bounce ideas off of someone. So even that is a different audience that reads the blog or goes to YouTube as well. And the point of all this is to say, like, why try all these different things? Because that's where people are. I want to be where they're looking for these questions. They want to get them answered. Let me throw a bunch of things out there and let's see if any of that works. And I don't know how much overlap there is between those different audiences. So it's like, well, if you're only going to go here, like I wish I had a Twitch channel, but I don't right now. But if you're going to hang out there, I need to consider it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I don't know when this is going to air, but if it airs like tomorrow, there will be a different technology. And then we're going to have to find a way to get there. Because you know who's doing that already? Every church that's really big in the country. They know how to harness that new technology and use it to emphasize the stuff that they believe. More power to them when they're doing it well. But then we need to be in that space too.
Right, that's so true. And, this is a great conversation. We're going to have more with Hemant Mehta in a second after this break.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
Welcome back to Free Thought Matters. We're talking to Hemant Mehta. He is the friendly atheist, and he is truly a friendly atheist. And while I'm sure he was always friendly, he was not always an atheist. And this is something you've talked about before, but you were raised Jain.
Yeah.
And so for my shallow sort of understanding of Jainism, which is very shallow indeed, but I know it is a non-theistic religion. So I'm always really curious, like what was unacceptable to you about
Yeah.
Jainism? Why did you need to go the extra step and call yourself an atheist?
Sure. So, yeah, Jainism is a non-theistic religion, though when I was growing up, all the Jains I knew seemed to believe in God. So there is a discrepancy between the actual theology and how people actually live as Jains.
Really?
Yeah, even now, my parents who are still Jains, they still talk about God. So it's still part of the culture, if nothing else. And they also believe in nonviolence, which is great. Like, who's opposing that? In fact, I grew up where no one had heard of Jainism, and I remember reading Sam Harris's The End of Faith, where he actually said, he talks about how fundamentalist religion is really bad. He has a critique of moderate religions too. But he said if everyone was fundamentalist Jain, we would not really be in a bad place. And I was just shocked that he knew about this religion that I grew up in. So I was fine with all of that part. Like, yeah, who thinks nonviolence is a bad idea? No, that's great. So I'm fine with all that. Where I parted ways was they do believe in the supernatural. They believe in heaven and hell. They believe in karma. They believe in reincarnation. And those supernatural aspects were the ones I started having questions about. I didn't doubt God at first so much. It was, how do we know about this karma thing? How do we know about reincarnation? That stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And the more I looked into that, the more I realized, not only is my religion, I think, wrong about all this stuff, I think religion is wrong about all this stuff. So I didn't make a leap from Jainism to some other religion that maybe was a compromise of sorts. It was, I go from here to atheism, which I know, like you said, it's a non-theistic religion. It doesn't sound like it's a huge leap. But growing up in a family where I was raised to believe in God, and we did have these supernatural beliefs and prayers and rituals, like that felt like a big leap for me too, just as it is for anyone leaving any religion. So it definitely felt like that had to change.
Right.
So
was it a ritualistic kind of upbringing? And if so, you mentioned your parents are still Jainists. So do you have any sort of artifacts that are still with you? I mean, I know you're a vegetarian.
Yeah.
But
so
other than that, I mean, are there any other ways that you're observant or culturally Jainist?
So now it's a game of picking your battles almost, like, because I have a great relationship with my parents, but part of it is they do their thing, I do mine when it comes to religion.
Like so many of us?
Like so many people too, yeah. And so, some of the religious stuff, I'll give you an example. When I had a child, they wanted to throw a baby shower. Great, fine. If my parents want to throw me a baby shower, my wife and a baby shower, fine, go for it. But they also wanted it to be really religious and do some of those rituals that went with it. And the compromise we kind of made is, look, when I have my wedding, stay away. We're going to plan this thing the way we want to do it. Sure. After that, do whatever you want. And so, we did the rituals and customs that they wanted to do because it meant something to them. Mm-hmm. It is something that meant literally nothing to me, but it's one of those, like, if this means something to you, fine. In terms of parts of Jainism that I still adhere to, like you said, the vegetarianism is a big part of that because they always raised me, the Jain culture, religion raises you to say, don't hurt animals. They're sentient creatures. Why would you do that? That one still made a lot of sense. I could rationalize that without resorting to the supernatural. And I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of religious people do that too. Like, even if I have my doubts about something in my religion, there are aspects of it that still seem like they make a lot of sense. And I think I'm the same way, where it's not like it's a big leap for someone who is a vegetarian for reasons I now don't agree to just maintain that. A lot of respect to people who go from eating meat to not eating meat. Right. That's a hard thing to do. Right. I did not have to take that hard step. So it's just the rationale behind it changed. Right. So that's probably the biggest aspect of my religious upbringing that I still hold on to. But there are still other aspects because, again, my family is still close. So we're still kind of in that religious community. And also, when you're growing up as an Indian person in America, your Indian community is in large part a religious community as well. So, when you gather with family and friends for whatever the reason, whatever the occasion is, religion's going to play a role in that too. But again, you learn when to pick your battles on that sort of stuff.
Right.
One thing I'm really curious about is your journalistic process. Like I said, I visit your site several times a day.
Thank you.
You often are writing about FFRF stuff, and so we have sort of an inside peek at how accurate you are and how fast you are.
Yeah.
I mean, you really seem to go the extra mile and reach out to the people involved in the case and get your facts right. And I'm wondering what that looks like, because you're accurate and fast, and sometimes you beat our press releases out. And I don't know how this happens. So.
It depends on the type of story. So I'll give you an example. There's a story I heard about this morning where I read about someone's version of it, and then my first thought is, I wonder if this is a hoax. I wonder if there's some truth to this, and I couldn't get it from the thing I was reading. So the first thing I did is I sent an email to the people it was about, and I'm like, I heard about this. Tell me if this is accurate or not, because I would love to talk about it. And then I could step back for a little while and say, I don't have to do anything about that right now. I'll get back to it tonight or something, and let's see if they respond. So a lot of times you can look to what newspapers have written about a certain story. You could see what critics have said about a story. And when I'm writing about whatever the topic is, I try to see what other people have said about it, because sometimes the criticism is what's really interesting. Sometimes the facts of the case alone are what's interesting. And it's kind of, I know other people don't necessarily have time to sift through that stuff. That's my job. So if I can provide that for people and say, like, look, here's a case that FFRF is working on. I know what their letter to this organization said. I know what their press release said. At the same time, I'm really curious, well, what did this school district say? What did the city council say? I wonder if there's video of it somewhere, because maybe that's interesting. And I can try to find it in as many places as I can. If I need to reach out to somebody, it's one of those things that it's not that hard to do, but it feels like it's a big deal.
Feels like a bigger barrier than
Yeah,
it
and
is.
once you get over that, it's like, oh, I found you on Facebook. I'm going to message you right away. And then it becomes, oh, this is just a habit now. And so that's part of it. It's just like, this is what I find interesting about this story. And yes, I'm coming to it from a place of, I have an opinion on this. I want to make sure the facts are right, but I also want to tell you what I think about it. And part of that is, let's see what other people have said, because maybe in some stories, the critics made a really good point that I have to address, because that's something a lot of people are going to be talking about. I'm sure you know this for FFRF, there are a lot of stories, a lot of cases that, there's some that are slam dunks. This is an easy thing to explain to people why this is wrong. There are some that are not at all clear why the law is on a particular side. One example I saw recently is a table in veterans hospitals that has a Bible on it, but it's a memorial to soldiers who have died in war. And there's an argument to be made that maybe those Bibles should not be on the table. It's not a maybe. They said the Bible should not be on the table. I could see how that's an emotional argument. I could see why people wouldn't want it on there. And I obviously see the church-state separation side of things. So the question is, I can't just tell you that story, I think. I think I owe it to people who might be stumbling upon this story because they're curious about it, to maybe explain, here's why this is a particular issue. Here's why we need to talk about this. And here's a story where maybe the atheists are doing the right thing, maybe for the wrong reasons, or maybe it's not going to go over well, so let me try to explain why this is happening. It happens a lot in Supreme Court cases where you hear justices in their arguments making two completely different points about the same issue. So how do you sift through that, especially when you're not someone who reads those things regularly? So I hope I can do some journalistic integrity to some of these stories, but it's really, here's what I find interesting about it, coming from a place of, I am an atheist. I totally support church-state separation, but I know all the people who are going to be looking at this and reading this, they might not be familiar with it. Maybe they're curious about this story, like, why are atheists coming after my school district? Well, let me try to explain that to you. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And once you get in the habit of saying, whose voices do I need to share in this story? What videos do people need to see so they can make sense of this? Let me show you that part right there, because this is what it's all about. If I can help you do that, that's when I feel like I'm doing my good work.
And the speed just comes from selling your soul.
Yeah. When you don't have a soul holding you back, you can do anything. Yeah, and hopefully it's fast enough. But again, you also want to balance that with accuracy. So
That's the amazing thing you do.
Well, we have time for one more question.
Yeah,
So
well, I
it's a
mean,
good one.
one thing I really am curious about too is you're on all these different platforms on the internet, and we've seen the rapid shift from these in the younger generation. 21% of kids born after '99 are atheist or agnostic, not non-religious, but atheist or agnostic.
Right.
Now, obviously, I think a lot of the Freedom from Religion Foundation's work and your work is contributing to that. We're probably the primary drivers.
totally.
But after that, do you think the internet is the big thing?
Yeah, I think it's so hard for me to make sense of this because it's such a different world. I know it sounds like old people when we're talking about this, but
So much has changed in 10
so much
years.
but the thing is now, these questions that even when I was growing up, you were kind of in a bubble about because you couldn't get good answers to a lot of the doubts or challenges you might have had in church. You can easily find those answers online, and you grow up thinking, oh, there are people who disagree with me on this. There are people who have good reasons for why they disagree, and you're exposed to those ideas really quickly. It doesn't matter what the platform is, but those platforms didn't exist
Right.
even when I was growing up in an age where technology was available. There's just so much better now, and there's so many more of them. So one thing that is just amazing is that they know atheists. They are familiar with atheists, even if they don't necessarily know one in person. They are familiar with the arguments atheists make, because you can't really talk about religion in our country without also talking about atheism too, in a lot of these cases, because church-state separation matters to all of us when you care about these topics. You can't talk about a Supreme Court case involving, a baker and a gay couple without also bringing up why these issues matter. And I think a lot of kids are also growing up in an era where every time they see religion in the news, it's almost never a good thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they grow up thinking there is a problem, or I know why people don't like my church.
Yeah.
I know why they don't like my religion. And these are not just because they hate God. They know the stereotypes are not true. It's not because they hate God. It's not because they're coming after me. Here are the reasons they give. And whether you agree with them or not, you're aware of that. So I think it's a lot easier to just know the ideas that are out there. I think it's a lot harder now to kind of grow up in a religious bubble where you didn't even realize questioning God was something you could do. And now it's like, I'm sure there are people who try to shelter you from that, but it's out there if you could find a way to look. And I've heard plenty of stories of people who live in a very sheltered environment who find a way to get answers to questions they have.
Hemant, thank you so much. It's been a blast. Thanks for coming over and joining us, and we hope to see you sometime soon. We will be following your stuff, as always, at The Friendly Atheist. And thank you for joining us at Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.